Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. I wanted to give a bit of an update as to why I haven't been as active posting recently, and to give a little of something else to you guys. So we're gonna get into that, and basically I haven't been making as much music, primarily because of the time it takes to animate. I've actually still been making the music, I just haven't animated any videos, which is odd, but I can't stop myself from writing lyrics and making beats, like it just happens. I just haven't had the time for the animation with the work on multiple board games that I've been creating, and with the other content on books and novels that I've been posting on the channel as well. There's just been no time for music. So I'm sorry if that's why you are on the channel and you're a big fan of the music. I will try and get some stuff out soon. But essentially, other than Third Age and the Cosmic card games I've also been working on, but I haven't posted much about online so far, I've been writing a book. I recently started reading a lot of Brandon, as you may have seen on the channel, Brandon Sanderson that is, and there were a lot of things I did like about his books, but there were also a lot of things that I wasn't a fan of, and I felt I could have done better, and I'm probably wrong. I'm not being arrogant in that sense. I'm the first to admit that. But I felt like I could tell a story without making some of those mistakes, at least. And I'm sure I'll make my own mistakes along the way. But that whole journey through Brandon's works, and I've been a huge fan of the Wheel of Time. I'm always reading Wheel of Time again. Like, I have the audiobooks on loop as I fall asleep. You know, I never finish a read without starting another one. I love books. I love fantasy. Why not write one? And so I did. Or at least I've started. I've written the first act of it, and out of 4 that I have planned. So I'm about 25% of the way there. 40,000 words so far, and it's going really well. I guess I'm kind of a discovery writer. I had these ideas for a few characters and a world where each nation has its own magic system, but they don't mix, and it's essentially a bit like Avatar: The Last Airbender, but not just 4 elements. It's much more complex how they're split up and what the different powers can do. It's not elemental based, and that's basically the premise of the story. I thought that today, as an extra little bit of content on the channel, because honestly it's not going to take me that long to make this, I would, for the first time publicly, read the prologue. So if you're not all interested in listening to my epic fantasy novel, then see you next time. If you are, without further ado, this is the prologue to Power versus Progress. Just a little note, I will be doing something visual to represent the point of view switches in this prologue, because there's 2 different characters that we swap back and forth between through the course of the prologue, so I will do something visual to represent that. Name calling. 45 years ago. Embers flickered across deadened grass that crunched beneath Derelid's boots as he ascended the hillside. No men had died today. The fires were simply for show. A reminder of what was waiting should discussions proceed badly for them. A reminder of what had always been waiting, apart from those times when an assault was already in progress. Another reminder came in the pair of crimson-robed figures waiting for him at the top of the hill. Blazing orange masks covered the face of both. Eye slits cut out the front in a way that must have allowed them to see despite the apparent complete darkness within. The other king's Ashbringers didn't concern him though, unmissable as they were. Their purpose seemed to be to unnerve those in their master's presence, to frighten them into some sort of subservience, he assumed. To Derelid, their ludicrous ensemble proved only to remind him of the seriousness of the man who did hold his attention. A man all in black, save for an uncovered face hardened like steel by a war older than he himself. Derelid stepped up to the man. Destroyer. Azathanol considered the fool in front of him. Who did he think to impress with that gaudy suit of lilac armour? He'd met common village children who could melt that ridiculous thing to bits in an instant. What did this man hope to gain by approaching a superior threat with an insult? Unless, of course, he didn't intend the title to be one. The way he handled the word wasn't with scorn as much as respect. This man respected him then, as Athanol could use that. Maker, he responded just as bluntly, causing the older man to wrinkle his brow a little. His hair was white as parchment, wispy and trying its best to escape the confines of the man's scalp. But he carried the weight of that suit nonetheless. In a way, the ancient must have been among the most honoured of his enemies. They had avoided death for the longest. That was the best explanation he'd been able to come up with for why they kept making these tired old men their rulers. Athanol blinked and found a small stone table resting solidly on an unusually flat patch of the hilltop that he hadn't previously noticed. 2 chairs sat across from one another, the exact same size and blockish, boorish design. The world deserved more passion. Such was the nature of things. Derelid waited for the other man to take a seat before doing so himself. Yes, he had made the chairs and table, but he could not be seen as eager to be off his feet. Well, the man had called him a maker. It had only seemed appropriate to make something. He hadn't stopped to consider at the time, though, the potential implications on his bearing that could be taken from the object of his choosing. Once seated, his eyes were at the same level with the other man. Even subconsciously he had ensured that, and the years had taught him to listen to what his subconscious told him. He could not afford to view this man as any lower than he, but just as much danger would come from viewing the man as even an inch higher. Each was a king in his own right, and kings could create great things. Kings could create peace, couldn't they? What will it take to bring an end to this war? The Maker King opened with a question, as Athanol hadn't expected that. He had thought this man would dance with his words, cut them in fabrications and build intricate lies from seeming truths. Instead, the madman spoke of something that simply could not be. These were not the lies of one trying to trick an enemy. They were a plea. This Derelid simply did not understand. This war can never end. It is as we are, as you are. It always is and will be. Just because the decrepit knight didn't fancy speaking with any level of actual intelligence didn't mean that he could not. Let him stew on that. Reaching forward, he took the goblet of wine that hadn't been on the table until he stretched his hand for it. Comforts could be found with little effort when meeting a sympathist with as much power as the king in front of him. In his time, as Athanol had met only 2, but who could be sure how much power those 2 actually had when compared to this man? The wine was bland, and disappeared halfway down his throat. Was that meant to be another insult? Or had the wine been such a careless thought that it just hadn't lasted? How many things did this man create in a day, without even noticing them before they vanished? There was so much they didn't understand about their enemies. Surely you cannot believe that, the man finally responded, elbows forming a triangle against the tabletop as he clasped his hands together in front of his face. He was concentrating hard on something. This constant fighting benefits none. We have the power to change that. Well, I put it to you, as Athanol, let us change it. Let us forge a pact that protects both of our nations. Something that sustains us for the years to come, and creates something new, better, stronger. Is that not what you wish to be? Perhaps that had been a little too direct, but Derelid could not in good conscience believe that corpses were a worthy price to pay for any feud of their forefathers. And this youth seemed so immovable, more like a force of nature than a human being, with seemingly little desire to grow into something more than he was. He had needed to push in some way. If there was one thing he'd always stuck to, it was to make a decision, any decision, rather than doing nothing. When he lifted his gaze, destruction danced in the boy's eyes. The man's eyes, he forced himself to think. We can forge a pact if you like, as Athanol told him, as though he had not just agreed to the one thing that had been denied his people for as long as they had existed. He let out a breath that he didn't realise he'd been holding. Then the black-clad king continued. We will make a powerful alliance for a time, But your thirst for expansion, growth, will be the death of you. All things must come to an end. This is the way of nature. Without destruction, how can one have any room left for creation? Indeed, the time would eventually come where we are forced to break the pact. Derelid shivered at the idea. A promise once made should not be broken, could not. To question that would be to question his entire worldview. A little more pressure and this moving corpse would break. Everything could be broken, destroyed. A pact could be broken, a nation could be broken, even a mind could be broken. To destroy was not an honour, nor a desire, it was the duty of one given casting such as he. It was necessary for humanity's continued existence, lest they grow too advanced, and cause irreversible damage to the entire planet and species. Is it not more sincere of me to simply attack you outright? He picked up. Call me Destroyer, if you will. Destroyer I am and will be, and I will take no pleasure in it, but I will do it nonetheless. I will destroy you, Derelid. Your people cannot be allowed to spread their influence. This isn't about influence, damn you, the other king snapped back, rising from his chair with a stiff clinking of armour. This is survival. Progress. Progress has to end eventually, or it isn't progressing towards anything. Take, for example, this conversation, which we all know is progressing towards the natural end that is your death. Devils know your wrinkles have been telling you to die for years. It's past time, old man. If the end wasn't there, what could you progress towards? Don't you see how both sides of the coin are needed to keep it spinning? Derelid paused and took a moment to gather himself. So this is how it must be. It sounded like a question, but it wasn't really. He had made his decision long before they sat at the table that he just now realised was no longer there. That could get disconcerting. Time to put an end to this. A hail of arrows fell from the sky as the first ball of fire exploded from Azathanal's hand towards him. The arrows weren't likely to hit, but any added confusion could be the difference between life and death today, and they wouldn't hamper him at all through his plate. In 2 seconds, the meeting had gone from measured words to a full-scale combat. He had heard the Ashbringer somewhere nearby, sparring with his own guard of honour. No time to think. The fire was almost on him. The air between them became synthesized stone, coalescing for just enough time to absorb the impact of the blast before dissolving again as he charged forward with a long gleaming blade in a hand. The sword melted moments before he struck his opponent. It hadn't dissolved naturally. This was his doing. It was then that Derelid noticed his plate was trying its best to melt as well. He let the armour disperse and replaced it with heavy levers, bringing a fresh sword into his other hand that connected with the other man's thigh and shattered into 1,000 shards. Many of them pierced his own skin through the leather, but the metal was gone before it had chance to do any real damage. Destroyed synthetics did not last long. How do you fight a man that blows up your weapons with a thought? Derelid understood now how this man had become their king. Up close, the destroyer was hesitant to use his fires, instead working his own tools against him. He rolled back as a stream of blackness left the other man's hand, travelling towards the spot Derelid had been swinging from moments before. Cursing, the young king sent another one streaking by his head as he retreated. He didn't want to think about what would happen to him if one of those streams hit his body. They looked like the embodiment of chaos. Luckily, that must have made it harder to control over distance, because a third stream arced into the earth a good metre to his left. Cracks immediately began to sprout from where the beam had connected, widening and causing spurts of magma to bubble out around his feet. There was no winning this fight. All he could do was distract this king for long enough that his grandson's retinue could infiltrate the destroyer battle tents and rescue his bride-to-be. Godspeed, young Maddox. I am sorry I won't be there to present you at the wedding. Accepting the fire being flung towards him, Daryl had synthesized a gust of wind to try and direct as much of the fire as he could back towards his murderer. He did not get to see if he was at all successful in the endeavour. And that is the prologue. I hope you liked it. Let me know what you thought in the comments if you stayed this long. And thank you for listening and being here with me for something a bit different to the usual types of content about other people's books that I make. But if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment something down below. Tell me what you thought of the prologue. Tell me if you just want me to start making music again, and you hate me for not doing. Tell me anything, because it'll help push the video, and yeah, that's about it. Tai'Shar.